Well, hello, I'm Jeff Baumgartner, a senior editor at Light Reading, and your host for this episode of Signal Strength, a podcast from Light Reading, focused on all things broadband, video, and streaming, and where we break down some of the headlines on the technologies and policies that are driving them all forward. And in this episode, we have Patrick Halley, the president and CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, or WIA. And he's here to provide a little bit of an update on the status and trends related to the nation's wireless infrastructure, including the build out and expansion of microcells, macro cells, small cells, and also explore what changes could be in store amid the AI era that we're in and the emergence of 6G, which is just around the corner. And we also dig into the Dish Wireless situation, whereby some tower owners and other infrastructure providers have actually filed lawsuits against Dish Wireless after Dish stopped making rental payments, believing it's excused from those contracts after EchoStar sold some spectrum to AT&T and SpaceX and is now in the process of shutting down its 5G network. And as you'll hear, Patrick offers a bit of an update on the WIA's position in the matter, basically that it's not opposed to the spectrum deals, but that the organization believes that Dish should be held accountable for its contractual obligations. And we're also catching up just ahead of ConnectX, which is WIA's big show, which is set for May 4th to 6th in Fort Lauderdale. So I had Patrick talk a little bit about what's in store for this year's event and what the big themes will be. So with that as our backdrop, let's get into it. Well, hey, Patrick, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have a chance to connect today.
Great to be with you, Jeff. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, hey, so I think we're going to try to cover quite a bit of ground today, talk about some recent studies and reports that you guys have put out. But maybe just to begin, for those who aren't maybe as familiar with your organization or don't follow you as closely, talk a little bit about the Wireless Infrastructure Association, like your general focus, an update on your constituents. I think it includes tower owners and other infrastructure companies. Yeah. So
happy to do it.
Yeah.
So WIA, the Wireless Infrastructure Association, we are what our name sounds like. We represent the companies that build, operate, and maintain the nation's infrastructure that powers wireless connectivity. So if you think about your wireless experience as a consumer or as an enterprise, almost assuredly it's going over infrastructure that's been built and operated by WIA members. So it could be a 200-foot macro tower on the highway that you've seen, or an antenna on a rooftop that you might have seen, or a small cell in a suburban or urban area, that infrastructure. But our membership also includes the nation's largest wireless carriers, the equipment manufacturers like Ericsson and Nokia and Qualcomm, as well as a suite of companies that are very involved in building communications, which is a growing focus for us, making sure that connectivity works in whatever venue you may be in. And then beneath all that are services companies, law firms, environmental specialists, engineers, right, construction firms, everybody who really does the work on behalf of those larger companies, building the networks that everybody relies on every day.
So pretty much anything and everything is kind of in that ecosystem. It sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And in terms of what we're doing every day, we're just effectively trying to provide the best business and regulatory environment for those companies to succeed, so that we can deploy the infrastructure that needs to get deployed to power the networks that everybody's demanding, from federal and state and local advocacy to education and workforce training, to convening, putting events on like ConnectX, which I suspect we'll talk about, our big annual event every May. And that's what we do.
All right. Well, we're talking just not long after your organization put out the latest annual by the numbers report, where you're tracking industry spend, the size of the workforce, the number of towers and cell sites that are being deployed. And just real quick, is that a U.S. only focus, or I don't know what?
Yeah, that's a U.S. only focus. We do have some members, large tower companies like American Tower and SBA and Phoenix Tower, who do, a lot of building internationally. And obviously, many of the companies like Ericsson and Nokia are international. But our focus as an association, and then the annual report we put out tracking the stats, is U.S. focused.
Okay. And how are you? Because it's a lot. There's a lot of really interesting data in there. But how do you collect that and kind of organize that for each annual report? I mean, you go into the individual companies, looking at their public filings. I mean, there's a lot of places to go.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of data sources out there. That effort's led by Ian Gillett. Ian is our vice president of innovation and technology. He's a longtime industry analyst, but he recently came on board as a full time member of the WIA staff last year. We've been doing that consistently. The most important thing about any report like that is that you keep your methodology consistent. And so Ian's looking at public reports filed by the public companies. He's looking at government databases with information on where towers are, and he's having private conversations with some of the private companies. So it's just a very thorough look into all of the deployment via multiple sources, consistent year over year, so that we can see trends and sort of where the numbers are headed over time.
Okay. And as far as like some of those numbers, like we can get into some of those, and we'll share if people are listening to this and you kind of see the story that goes around it. We'll share some of the top level findings from the 2025 report. But what do you think? What do you see as like the biggest takeaways from the 2025 report, and how it fits in with some of the broader trends that you're seeing across the industry? Yep.
I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is just the consistency, right? So 158,000 plus purpose-built macro cell towers that make possible the communications that everybody relies on every single day. 830,000 indoor small cell nodes, almost 200,000 outdoor small cell nodes. And over time, as we go through cycles from 3G to 4G, 5G, 4G to 5G, et cetera, it is a cyclical process, right? And as spectrum gets made available by the FCC and the carriers go to deploy that spectrum, you see a massive investment and a massive deployment in the early years of that cycle. That happened several years back in the early part of 5G. Right now, I'd say we're sort of in between cycles, right? Sort of maybe towards the tail end of the infrastructure build part of 5G, not necessarily the benefits of 5G, but the infrastructure piece of it, while we're planning for 6G. But what's interesting to me is the numbers, they go up, right? In some years where we're on the early side of the infrastructure build in any particular G, if you will. But they're always consistent, right? Like there's always a consistent demand for building infrastructure to keep pace with the data that is being demanded on these networks, which just consistently goes up. And so for me, what's most interesting about these numbers is the fact that it's really pretty consistent, right? We have between the capex and the opex that the carriers and the other companies are spending every year, this $65 billion. I don't think people appreciate how much money gets invested into the infrastructure on top of all the other spend that goes on to build these networks and to create the hundreds of thousands of jobs just in the infrastructure sector alone. And that's really what that report reflects.
Okay. Yeah, I thought one of the I was kind of going through it. You really highlighted that there's more macro cells, or I'm sorry, there are more, I think, small cells, right, being deployed than macro towers, right? And I think that was a trend in 2025. I mean, has it kind of been a trend over, the last couple of years? And, what's been kind of driving, is it like, hey, we just need to densify?
Well, so what I would say is there's more total small cells than there are total, but that includes indoor, all the DAS systems, right? There's actually more macro cell sites than there are outdoor small cells. And in recent years, honestly, I think that there's been a more of a focus on co-location on macro cell sites than there has been on small cells. Now, that may change, probably will at some point, as we complete the 5G cycle and go into 6G, where you will have increased densification, which will require the use of more small cells. But right now, actually, the focus has really been more on the macro cell site side. I think most of the carriers have been focused on, co-locating on existing macro cell towers wherever they possibly can, figuring out where it makes sense to deploy new macro sites, which there were several thousand new macro cell sites built last year. There was actually more growth on the macro cell site side last year than there was on the small cell outdoor small cell. We'll see if that trend continues. I do think over time you're going to continue to see a mix, especially as new spectrum becomes available in the next several years, which will require a mix, as is usually the case.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the macro side in terms of like where the new activity is happening, I don't know if the report really gets into it to this degree, but maybe kind of wonder what your sense is. Is it where's that activity happening? Is it more like on the rural side, or is it just to
It's a
kind of
mix. It's
get
a
the
mix.
edges?
There's definitely edging out, right, to reach rural areas. But then there's also infill, densification, where there's two reasons why you build new infrastructure, right? Um, Either you're building in an area that lacks sufficient coverage, right? And in some cases that you may not be able to co-locate on an existing cell site, so you need to build a new one, right? That's certainly the case in rural areas where there just simply isn't coverage. And so you've definitely seen a lot of focus on, making sure we have coverage in more areas where it simply lacks. And then there are instances where we need to densify, right? The first thing you try to do when you're going to densify is to look, is there existing infrastructure, that I can co-locate on? Sometimes there's not, right? And there's just simply not an option, and you need to build new infrastructure. So it's a mix, but there's definitely been a focus on building out in rural areas. I mean, one thing to also keep in mind is at this point, this is not just a mobility play, right? What the spectrum that's being deployed and used, and the infrastructure that powers it. Of course, it's to make possible the nearly 600 million wireless connected devices in the United States, so that people can access the network when they're on the go. But it's also about fixed wireless to the home. So in some areas, particularly in rural areas where there just hasn't been, frankly, sufficient connectivity options for consumers, but even in suburban and urban areas, the carriers are using their spectrum to make fixed wireless 5G home an option. So we now have, in addition to the hundreds of millions of mobile broadband wireless users every day, we have 14 million homes that now get their broadband at home, their fixed connection, over a wireless link. So I think because of that constant demand for mobile access, the growing demand for fixed wireless 5G home broadband, 14 million today, we actually think the market's closer to 30 million at the end of the day that could benefit from that technology. So when you get all that, you have to edge out in rural areas, and you have to densify your network. And that ends up meaning you need more macro cell sites. And in some areas where it makes sense, you need more small cells.
Yeah, I guess it kind of fits in that you're never really done.
You are never really done. That's
Yeah,
exactly right. It's funny if you talk to people who, at the very beginning
yeah,
parts of wireless, we were going to have, thousands of wireless customers, and we were going to build this network, and it was going to be done, right? That's just not how it works. We're constantly,
well,
there's
new use
constant
cases.
innovation.
Yeah, new use cases emerge.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. And I know we're only in April here, but, as far as like what you've been able to glean so far, do you expect more of the same in 2026? Kind of a gradual kind of uh, increase, or do you see some changes on the horizon for this year?
So for 2026, I think more steady state from where we were in 2025, where carriers are continuing to invest. They have to continue to invest in their network, maintaining their current capabilities and preparing for the future. So I think generally steady state in 2026, but there are absolutely opportunities on the horizon for a couple of reasons. First, our industry and the wireless carriers and CTIA and other organizations that we work with really pushed, and Congress listened, that we need more spectrum, right, to meet the demands going forward. And I'll talk about what that might look like. And because of that, last year in the budget reconciliation bill, Congress passed a law that said that you need to make over the next decade 800 megahertz of new spectrum available, specifically for full power licensed spectrum use. That means we're going to be looking at multiple spectrum bands, whether it's the 2.7 band, the 4 gigahertz band, the 7 gigahertz band, lots of potential spectrum bands that will be made available for auction. The first auction will be July of next year, will be to auction between 100 and 200 megahertz of upper C-band spectrum, just above where the C-band auction was in 2020. And so there's a lot of new spectrum over the next decade that will be rolling out. And throughout that process and throughout that cycle, you're going to need more infrastructure to make that spectrum usable, right? So I think steady state for now, but I think once you have the C-band auction, the upper C-band, and those other spectrum bands over the next several years, you'll continue to see demand, and it will increase, particularly with those bands that are higher up, which just because of their propagation characteristics are going to require more infrastructure. The second thing is AI. And I know we talk about AI all the time. People might even be getting tired of it. But the
Yeah.
reality is it is going to have an impact. It already is. We just put out a report called AI Infrastructure by the Numbers, in which the fundamental takeaway from that report was lots of people are using AI, and most of them are using it on their mobile device. Like half of the search that people are doing is for AI is happening on their mobile device, right? At this point, about 4% of network traffic on mobile data traffic is because of AI. We think that probably looks more like 10% by the end of the year. And I mean, just think about it. If I'm wearing my Meta AI glasses and I'm using them to take a picture or a video, and I'm asking my AI agent, "Hey, what am I looking at?" And then I take a picture of it, but I want to alter that image to do something else, right? And it's all happening via my my Meta Ray-Ban AI glasses connected to my phone, going off to somewhere to do that, that inferencing, if you will. It's all happening on my mobile device. This year when people go to ConnectX in Fort Lauderdale in May, they're going to be making their airline reservations. They're going to be making their hotel reservations. They're going to get restaurant reservations. They're going to buy their pass. They're going to do all that, in a traditional manner, most likely. A year from now, people will have an AI agent. They'll be on their phone and they'll say, "Hey, I need to go to Fort Lauderdale between May 4th and May 6th. I want to stay here. I don't want to spend more than $350 a night. And I want reservations at these 3 restaurants." And bang, it's all doing it. But think about that. That's a lot more demand on the network than what we would traditionally do, which is like go do a static search on a website or
Yeah.
go look at
Web
Facebook, right?
browsing,
Yeah.
yeah, a
So, so
text. Yeah.
yeah, more
Yeah.
spectrum, more AI in and on the network. And all of that means over the next decade, I do think there's lots of opportunities, and none of it works without the digital infrastructure that powers the wireless network and and the fiber that goes to the data center, that goes to the tower. So we're going to need a lot more digital infrastructure. I think 2026 is relatively steady state, but I think the horizon is bright.
Interesting. Well, yeah, it's keeping an eye on the traffic will definitely kind of help to gauge what the adoption levels are like, obviously. But yeah, what's kind of your person like? How are you using AI from a personal standpoint right now? Because when I would moderate some sessions, I'm like, oh, I just query the audience. How many of you subscribe and
Yeah.
actually pay money, for some sort of AI service? But even at the personal level, yeah, what's your current use cases like? Are you
Yeah.
subscribed to like a Chat GPT, or do you kind of dabble in other things?
I was just reading an article yesterday, and they described kind of 3 types of AI users, and it's basically like the heavy users who use it for everything, the resistors, right, who just don't want to use it at all and think it's going to be terrible for our society, and then there's sort of this middle category. And I'd say I'm in the middle, right? Look, if I'm preparing for a panel or to give remarks, I might throw some ideas into AI to just see what it comes back with. It helps me get my brain thinking. You know what I mean? I want to make sure it's in my voice. I want to make sure that it's coming from my perspective. But I think AI can be a really helpful tool when you're going to write something or we're going to speak, to just get ideas flowing.
And
And
give you
look,
some
like
guidance.
what's
Yeah.
that? Yeah, and as an organization, WIA has 30 employees, and we do a lot of work on behalf of our members. We're tracking lots of legislation. You can imagine AI being useful there. We're training and educating, where we're doing a lot of online education. You can imagine AI is helpful there, right? And accelerating what was already a pretty good process, but it's absolutely making what we do better and increasing the speed at which we can do it. So, I encourage our team to think on their own, but to be foolish not to take advantage of these tools if it can help you be a better version of what you already are.
Okay. Good. Yeah. So AI is going to kind of fit into the infrastructure going forward. Maybe this ties in, but with 6G kind of on the horizon here, spectrum wise, densification. You know, what other ways do you see 6G kind of changing the dynamic? On the infrastructure side.
Well, I think what's really interesting is 6G will be the first wireless generation, if you will, in which AI is native. It's an AI native network. AI is built in to the core of that infrastructure, to the core of those networks, as opposed to just kind of being a bolt on after the fact, right? That's a big deal. I'm a DC telecom lawyer. What the heck do I know? In terms of what that ultimately means. But the reality is, you're going to see a lot more AI on device. Right, there's going to be certain things that the device itself will have the chip in it, and it's capable of doing the AI computations on the device. And then there will be things that are so intensive that it will require going back out to the cloud to do the inferencing and doing completing the task, if you will. And that's why you see all these data centers, right, going crazy, not just with training, but now being increasingly used with agentic AI, doing the inferencing as well. And then there's going to be something in the middle, which is what I'm really excited about, which is there are going to be certain services and applications that require high capacity and super low latency that can only be done where the infrastructure and the compute is happening at the edge of the network. So for years, we've talked about the idea of mobile edge compute, right? But I think we're actually on the
Going back a
cusp.
long time. Yeah.
I hear you, right? And like I don't want to overhype things. Like some people think we were guilty of overhyping 5G, and in some ways we were. Although at the same time, I will tell you the results of 5G for the consumer and for the enterprise have been phenomenal. The fixed wireless I talked about earlier, the average speeds, many different aspects of 5G have been really phenomenal. With AI, again, I don't want to overhype it, but I'm confident that there are going to be services and applications that you're going to have to do the compute local to the user, particularly for enterprises with manufacturing and robotics. Robotics is happening. We may not be feeling it on the consumer side yet, but robotics is absolutely happening on the manufacturing side, and enterprises are going to increasingly use the technology. Connected vehicles. Look, 5 years ago, most people hadn't taken a ride in an autonomous vehicle. A lot more have now, and a lot more are going to.
Have
And
you?
I actually have not yet.
No, I haven't either. My
But
wife
I,
did.
yeah, but
She,
I'm 100% willing to
the
do it in the
experience.
right setting. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not going to happen if we don't have the connectivity where we need it, in which the compute is local, right, and the latency is low enough so that we have confidence that the technology will work. And so we're going to have this shift going forward where you've got on-device AI, you've got AI in the cloud, and then you've got a lot more AI being powered locally where the end user is, and that's going to require a lot more sort of edge infrastructure, and that's something that we're certainly focused on as an organization. I'm really excited. We've had at our conference this year. Of course, we have all of our major tower companies. We've got the carriers. We have, but we also have companies, and we've got Ericsson and Nokia who are going to be leaders in that digital edge discussion. But we also have companies like Qualcomm and Dell and Intel and Nvidia speaking at the main stage at ConnectX. Why? Because of what I just talked about. It's sort of this intersection between artificial intelligence and the digital infrastructure that's necessary to power it. And I think our sector will be right in the middle of all that.
All right. And that sector, it's like I don't know how this kind of fits in, but we've been trying to keep an eye on all the activity happening on the satellite
Mm.
end. There's a lot of obviously with the direct to device stuff to keep people connected. All this interest in like orbital data centers, which is I don't know. I don't know if you think it'll just be complementary, but you know, is satellite, does that kind of, in your way, as you kind of think through it, would that be part of your domain at some point? I mean, in terms of interest, because I mean, it's wireless in nature, right? So it's just
Well, I mean,
a
look,
lot
every
further
every
away.
satellite every satellite has a space station, and every satellite has an Earth station, right? So there is physical infrastructure that satellite on the Earth that satellites depend on, and our sector does interface with satellite on that front. A lot of the networks also use satellite backhaul, particularly in some of the more rural areas. So there is an intersection. Look, I think satellite's an important component of the entire digital infrastructure ecosystem. I think direct to cell, for example, that many companies are now offering is, or on the cusp of really starting to offer, is an important tool. There are certain areas where you're just never going to have physical infrastructure, and having that ability, the direct to cell in those areas, is a phenomenal technology. I don't think that it's going to replace terrestrial infrastructure. I think it's an excellent supplement to the existing terrestrial infrastructure that we have. There's just physics and cost issues that are never going to make it a replacement for the core terrestrial infrastructure that our members build. But it's a great technology, and I think there's a lot of partnerships forming right now. You mentioned data centers from space. That's sort of a relatively new concept. SpaceX has talked about launching 1 million satellites in space that'll be powered by the sun. That's quite a vision. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No,
Nonetheless,
no, the launch
yeah.
capacity, yeah, would have to go bonkers. Yeah, to even have a shot. I guess that's why they're kind of like the up to 1 million, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this is the vision, where you're going to actually be for a while. It'd probably be a little bit less, but
But think about what we're
these big
talking about.
companies going after it. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. It's
Think
like
about
it's going to
yeah.
happen. It feels like.
Some version, right? Like think about what we're talking about with data centers and the wireless infrastructure and the satellite sector. Like what an exciting time it is to be in our industry, where the limits on the capabilities of communications technology are frankly they're not limited, and that's why I think we're seeing such continued focus and demand to really make it possible for us to deploy the infrastructure that needs to be deployed. And that's why we're so focused on getting the policies right to make sure that we do have the right policies in place so that we do have the infrastructure in place to meet these demands.
All right. Well, I'm going to change gears a little bit, and this is probably more of a sensitive area, right? I think we've been all following what's going on with Dish Wireless, right? Kind of in the wake of EchoStar selling the some spectrum to SpaceX and AT&T, and Dish Wireless, as we're all been following, believes that because they're shutting down the 5G network, that they're kind of excused from these contractual obligations with tower owners and other infrastructure companies. Now, I'll let you just kind of get us up to speed on WIA's position on that, right? Because I think you're okay with the deal, right? But you've got a lot of constituents who are, um, kind of fighting what Dish is kind of arguing. We got a lot of court cases, some other legal activity going on. But yeah, just kind of level set where your organization is on that
Sure.
issue.
As you said, WIA does not oppose the spectrum sales. I think the spectrum being put in the hands of AT&T and SpaceX um, is a good thing, right? That spectrum will be put to its best and highest use, I think, when it's in the hands of companies that really want to deploy networks and operate networks using that spectrum. So first and foremost, we do not oppose the transactions, but we are fundamentally opposed to the idea that the contracts in which Dish Wireless signed with our members and many companies no longer have to be honored. That's just not how this works. So we're fundamentally opposed to the fact that they are, suggesting that they are excused. They are not. They were not forced to sell their spectrum. They are voluntarily doing that, and good for them. It's going to be 45, $50 billion in proceeds from those spectrum sales. And the reality is, our members built the network for Dish. They came to us, they entered into long-term contracts with wireless infrastructure companies, which is how this industry has flourished for decades, right? And if Dish is able to sell their spectrum for $50 billion and walk away without honoring the contracts that it signed with tower companies, with fiber providers, with rooftop landlords, with equipment manufacturers, that's a real windfall that will significantly damage the wireless infrastructure ecosystem. The wireless infrastructure ecosystem depends on predictability. It depends on people valuing long-term contracts, right? Dish had a choice when it had deployment obligations. It could have gone out and built its own network from scratch. Would have been really expensive and would have taken a really long time. They didn't do that. Why not? Because The logical thing was to partner with existing infrastructure providers to co-locate on those towers, to spread the cost of their deployment over multiple years, and that's what they did. They entered into long-term contracts with our members, and at this point, it's our ask is really quite simple. We just want them to honor their agreements. And so, where does it stand? The FCC is considering their transactions. As I said, we don't oppose them. What we do want, though, is we want the FCC to make clear that these were voluntary spectrum sales. Number one, number two, that the parent company EchoStar, who's going to receive these billions of dollars from the proceeds, will honor any obligations that are ultimately owed by Dish Wireless, whether that's through settlement or litigation. And frankly, we think they ought to put money aside in an escrow to make sure that whatever obligations Dish Wireless ultimately has, there's actually money available to honor those obligations. So we're having those conversations at the FCC, very active, and hopefully that will be resolved soon. And I would also just say, of course, companies had to litigate. When you have billions of dollars at stake, right, and you tell them you no longer have a valid agreement and we're not going to pay you, what do you expect them to do, right?
Yeah, I don't think there was probably any surprises anywhere at EchoStar or Dish. It's kind of like this is the let's get sued letters, and kind of see where it goes, right? And they do have a number of, a handful of different court cases. It's going to be interesting to see where that ends up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because
EchoStar,
or Dish, they like to go to the mat on this sort of thing.
Well, look, here's the thing. While we're actively engaged at the FCC, I can assure you, as any rational economic actor is, that our members are interested in reaching settlements with Dish, but we need them to come to the table and have good faith discussions about what a settlement could look like, because nobody wants this to drag on for years. It's unfortunate, the situation, but we'd like to see this resolved, and ideally that would be with reasonable settlements. And if that can't happen, then we need the FCC to take action here.
All right. Yeah, so a lot of moving parts. We'll try to keep an eye on how things shake out. It might take a little while. So last thing, you talked a little bit about ConnectX, right, which is your big show just around the corner. I'll be out there. Looking forward. This will be my first time there.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but I haven't been to them. But I mean, this will be a first for me. But what's going to be new or different this year, or maybe the big themes that are going to be the top, driving the discussion?
Well, Jeff, I really think the show is kind of it's a reflection of the conversation we've been having today. So you have 4,000 people. It's the one event in North America that brings together the entire infrastructure ecosystem. So similar to what I described as our membership, you'll have lots of people from the carriers, from the infrastructure companies, the manufacturers, the services firms, all together in one room. What's different? So we will have a satellite session on Monday, the first day of the show. We will have the chief of the Space Bureau from the FCC along with satellite experts. That's new. And I think it's important that we have an honest dialogue about what's possible, what's not possible, what will the impact of satellite be. The other thing is we will have, for the first time, as I mentioned earlier, a much more of a focus on the digital edge infrastructure. Right? What is the impact of AI in the network with AI RAN and how that plays out? And what is the impact of AI on the network in terms of how enterprises and consumers are using artificial intelligence? And more importantly, what does that mean for the infrastructure deployment going forward? Same with satellite, right? How do these technology developments impact the infrastructure to meet the demands today, but also tomorrow? And so we're really excited. We will have great main stage sessions talking about those issues and the core tower industry businesses, featuring the CEOs of the largest tower companies in the world. So, yeah, I think it's going to be great. And we'll have a lot of fun. Fort Lauderdale, Florida is a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to heading out there and being a sponge. I think I'm moderating something too. So yeah. It should be a good show. But Patrick, thanks a lot. I think that's where we're going to leave it for today, but I really appreciate you coming on, covering a lot of different ground, and looking forward to keeping the dialogue going.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure thing.